All right, we're going to go ahead and get started a minute early if that's okay with you guys. But welcome to the panel on railroading. We're going to talk a lot about railroading whether you want to or not today. Before we get started, we do want to introduce ourselves. We are How to Be a Better DM. We're a podcast all about how to tell better stories, have better experiences at your table, all without spending all of your money or all of your time or ruining all of your relationships, because those are important. I'm Justin Lewis. I've been doing the podcast for about 3 years now, also a professional DM, also a newly minted realtor, also father, husband, human being. You can go now.
I'm Tanner Weyland, not a father. Who knows? But just kidding. But anyway, I joined Justin a little bit after he started. I've enjoyed D&D for many years. Enjoyed being a nerd for even longer. Beyond that, I think I'm very excited about this topic because as someone that stresses when I don't feel in control, it's been healthy for me to learn how to just give a little bit of that away. And so hopefully we'll be able to discuss that. And speaking to that, if you guys have any questions throughout, feel free to raise your hand. We're happy to stop and answer them. In fact, that's part of what makes a great panel.
Absolutely. So if you do have a question, raise your hand. We'll ask your question and then either answer it or bank it for later. Let's see. To get started, we want to ask you some questions. So raise your hand if you are a dungeon master. Okay, raise your hand if you are a player instead of a dungeon master. Nice, we have a lot more players here. And then raise your hand if you're both. Okay,
yeah.
Probably all the same hands raised up.
All the DMs keep their hands down.
Awesome. Raise your hand if you railroad people on purpose sometimes. Great. Raise your hand if you hate railroading or railroaders. Oh, this is going to be a very spicy conversation. Let's see, what other questions can we ask?
How many of you feel like railroading has a purpose?
Interesting.
Okay. I like that because it feels like you're going to agree with a lot of what we have to say today.
Awesome. How many of you have come to some of our other panels? Okay, these guys are awesome, and you can all be like them if you come to our other panels. I'm sorry, a little plug. But to get started, let's just kind of set the scene a little bit. What do we mean when we say railroading?
For me, when I think of railroading, the visceral reaction, negative reaction I have, makes me think of being controlled. Like, especially as a player, it makes me think of when I wanted to do something, and no matter how creative I was, the DM was like, well, screw you, man, without so many words. And the other form of railroading that I kind of have that visceral memory of is being a DM and being like, why won't you do the obvious thing, you know? And it's frustrating in either case, and it feels almost antithetical to the creativity you expect out of D&D, you know?
Yeah. I think one of the difficulties behind railroading is because it is kind of this broad term that's also very emotionally charged for people, right? So when someone says, I don't want to railroad, that has some emotional connotations within their mind. I think the general metaphor that I just like to kind of keep in mind is a train on a railroad track, right? The idea is the story is going to go this way, despite what happens, the players do on the train, right? The train is going to go, obviously they could blow the train up, which they might, but you get the idea, right? That's the metaphor I'm thinking of. And I think it does have a lot to do with choice, agency, and sort of expectations almost. We've used that word a lot in our other panels, and we're probably going to use it in the other ones too, because it's such an important concept when it comes to D&D or TTRPGs. So with that in mind, we've sort of fleshed out somewhat the idea of railroading. What's the opposite of railroading?
I mean, in my mind, it's just having free player choice. Like whatever challenge they want, like they get to choose the challenge and then approach that challenge however they want to do it, right? That's like, if we're going the full opposite, that's it. Where it's like, okay, sandbox world, you as a DM spent hours prepping everything. And then you're like, well, I don't know what they'll do. They'll do what they want to do. And then when they get there, they can approach it however they want. That's, in my mind, that's like the full opposite. And most people don't do, most people fall in between those two, I feel like.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I sort of struggled thinking of what the opposite of railroading is, right? Because the concept to me is just like, question.
No,
comment.
I want to take a stab at this. The opposite of railroading, but keeping that same negative connotation is empty worlds. Like I've had a DM where like he's like, I want your characters to drive what's going to happen, but like I was not told that beforehand, and now I feel this weird pressure that my DM has said your character is from a race that has enslaved this other race of this character in your party. How are you going to deal with that? And what other things are we going to interact with? I don't know. I didn't come prepared with this. I don't know all of the different politics that you've got in a Cold War going on that you want us to interact with, but I don't know how to get there.
Interesting. Yes.
I actually want to build off of that too. I think negatively what people fear of the opposite of railroading is aimlessness. Of what am I doing? You're supposed to give me the goal, and if they do not have a set goal in mind, it's what are we doing?
Yeah.
It's that question.
Yeah.
That was my biggest mistake in my second session. That was my worst session ever. Was literally that problem.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because all of you raised your hands when we were like, oh, is there a use for railroading? And maybe railroading is the wrong term. Maybe it's like, is there a use for a clear goal? And that's obvious. Everyone's like, oh, I love knowing that in that distance there's a mountain. Go to that mountain, cool things are going to happen. Versus just being like, hey, you see a mountain, you see a forest, you see a town over there, you see this. What do you want to do? One feels, for some players, a little constraining, but the other feels like, oh, what do we do? I guess I have to come up with motivation myself. And I think there's campaigns where that totally works. But speaking to the main question of this panel of like, how can we avoid the toxic aspects of railroading? I think the first key is just remembering like, hey, railroading doesn't mean you have to prescribe everything. It does mean that you lay out clear objectives or clear points of interest for the player.
Yeah, I think of instances where I was a player and also when I was a DM, where when I was a player, it felt like the story didn't have any through line, right? It wasn't really a story. They were more just episodes of stuff that happened. And I wouldn't necessarily say that was a toxic way to not have any sort of structure. Like it was sandboxing. I think it was just more so I was just trying to see something that wasn't there. And then as a DM, I've looked and waited for my players to do something, and they are like, what are we supposed to do? Kind of an idea. And I think they, in those instances, had kind of incorrect expectations of me trying to railroad them, and I was like pulling it back. So I think it's really an interesting dynamic, but it does show that it's really a spectrum, right? You're not a railroader or a sandboxer. You're really moving along that spectrum from time to time, and I think, like you said, how do we make it so when you do hit one of those poles, it's a positive experience for your players versus a negative one? So let's talk about good railroading. And I know some of you out there are probably getting a little frustrated with that term because you probably have such emotional connection to railroading being bad, but is it possible, and what are some good examples of good railroading?
I think that, did we have no, anyway. I think that an example in my book, there's like two ideas that come to mind. If you're in like a sandbox world, a good example of railroading then is like, okay, you created essentially a framework and they did what they want, but then let's say that they had an NPC that they suddenly started bullying, happens all the time. And then that NPC, comes back later. And then suddenly they become one of the recurring villains. I think that's an element where it's like, okay, are you railroading by bringing up past events within kind of a free roaming world? No, I mean, it's a little bit of railroading because you're like, hey, I want them to experience this thing. I think it'd be fun. So I'm going to bring it up again. I'm going to have that person reappear. I'm going to make it so they deal with the consequences of their action. Oh, that town that they didn't save from the pack of ogres, they have to deal with it again. Even though you might think that like, oh, we just let them do whatever and then they move on to the next thing and the next thing. Reoccurring things, that's an example of railroading that's actually paying off earlier choices of theirs.
I really like that actually, and I think the whole concept of railroading is just intertwined with the concept of choice, right? Being able to make a choice, and that's really why we play D&D, because we want to make choices that we either can't or won't make in our normal lives, right? Like I doubt any of you are murder hobos, or at least I hope not. Please, yeah. Anyways, yeah, it's a question.
I'm also going to say, having played for longer than I care to admit, I've had different groups. The first group I played with, I mean, railroading was a cuss word.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, hi, here's my plot, and I literally would have them, what's the most opposite thing I could do? I really had a better group to do that. And so I developed games around, or I developed a campaign around, all right, here's still the plot, but here's 5 choices. Or here's kind of but I'm now like teaching my kids, and they're at that age where, yeah, I literally have to railroad that plot, or else we're going to sit at the table all night staring at each other.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think to that point, I think there are situations where you do have to move things along, right? So for example, if you have a production level game that you're doing on Discord or YouTube or whatever, sometimes you do need to move the story along for your viewers. In a certain way, when you play D&D, you are the performers and the viewers. So if your DM views it that way, they might see that, oh, I need to move it along so my viewers, the players, find this interesting. I personally view it as sort of like a string of connected hourglasses, and that sort of represents choice, like the field of choice that characters have. So at any given moment, their field of choice could be wide or narrow depending on their previous circumstances. So if they go to a crypt, they have a quest to enter the crypt and find out what's going on inside. If they go in the door versus if they stay out, right, at that point they sort of have a binary choice. You can't go in the door and stay out unless some weird things are happening, which I don't understand, right? But then they finish the quest, they come out of the crypt, they go back to the town, and their field of choice widens. And I think sometimes as a DM, to keep the story moving along, you do need to sort of artificially narrow their field of choice, right? They're stuck at the tavern having arm wrestling contests for 3 days. Well, just so happens the guy who they arm wrestle is a bounty hunter and wants to kill them all, you know, so yes.
I have a really, really good DM handle this because our group was kind of known for being a little more on the creative side. I personally have been banned by 3 different DMs because I didn't like the railroading. I wasn't doing anything crazy, it was just creative stuff.
Yeah.
He handled it in a really, really good way because he had a team of people that were kind of very on edge with the we're not going to do your story. So he kind of gave us just a brief overview of the plot, right? Evil king, whatever. We all met in a tavern, pretty standard. But what he did was there was a large board in the tavern, kind of with like help wanted and quest lines. So, you know, we could talk to the bartender. He had a rat problem in the cellar. We could look at the board and there was like, rescue my fiance. There's this monster attacking crops, or help the old lady sort her potions. Like, and there were maybe 3 to 5 choices on that board that we could all kind of look at and then kind of talk about as a group of what would your character be interested in. And I think that was just a very, very good way to handle it because then it was a very set, you know, okay, you're going to go do this quest line, but we didn't feel like we were forced into making any of those choices.
And I love that. And I think the reason why some DMs don't do that is they're worried about the wasted effort, right? You're like, oh, if I prepare 5 quests and they choose one of them, well, that's 4 quests that I just wasted time on. My favorite trick is reskinning unused content. Just being like, oh, well, they didn't go and save the kids that were kidnapped by the kobolds. Now suddenly it's like, oh my goodness, there's a princess who got kidnapped by not kobolds, and I use that later because I use that effort, right? Just reuse it so that you feel like that none of that is wasted and you can give choices.
Yeah. Real quick, to that point, I think that also shows something else that's really important with the concept of railroading is in those cases where you were banned, I'm guessing the DMs had a very specific idea of the story they wanted to run, right? Which is, there's nothing wrong with that. But you had a very specific idea of the character you wanted to play and the play style you wanted to have, which again, nothing wrong. And in that case, it's just a case of, hey, this story isn't really what I'm looking for. I'm gonna go find a story that actually works with me and a DM that, is doing what I want to do. So I think from the very beginning, as DMs, you need to be deliberate in what you are trying to do and let your players know, right? Let them know, hey, I do have like a specific story. I'm going to try and finish this in a year, or this is a long-term campaign. I don't really know where this is going to go. So like whatever you guys want to do, I'm totally up for. And I think as DMs, we could do a better job of being clear with ourselves what we actually want versus what we want, but we're not telling ourselves we actually want. And the question in the back first and then in the front.
Well, I was just going to comment that one of the kind of tricks that I've seen in things like video games are kind of key jingling in order to like kind of nudge your players in the right direction. I think of games like Breath of the Wild where pretty much no matter where you are in Hyrule, you can see Hyrule Castle, and that is reinforcing the goal that you will, like, you still have the freedom to go where you want, but always in the player's mind, that's kind of where you're supposed to be. And so when they actually do go there, that is still their choice, but you are kind of nudging them.
Yeah, the points of interest and emphasizing points of interest, huge. I think that as a DM, we think that we're doing that, and maybe we could do it a little bit better. Like, if you want your players to go to the castle, is every NPC being like, man, that castle, buddy. Like, my cousin got took to the castle. And I think that there's a lot of ways you can kind of weave it in. It's like, oh my goodness, you see the sun coming up over the horizon, slightly blocked by the castle. There's a lot of ways you can do it. But the key is like you want to emphasize these points of interest. And it's best if you have multiple. Because the great thing about, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, games like that, they'll have multiple. And so eventually you start out with the things that are most interesting to the individual players. And eventually they'll get to the one that you think is interesting. It just might take a while,
Yeah. Question here.
I think also what's really important about what she was saying is really knowing your player characters. You can't just be like, oh, this is a cool thing. You have to think, no, what's in it for these characters? You have to put yourself in their shoes, because you could just be like, oh, there's a bard maid that needs help. Who cares? Okay, if you're just doing filler content to make it feel full, that's not choice, because you know they're not going to choose it. You know they're going to wander around until they actually find something that will develop them as a character and as a person. That's what really gets them going. So you need to understand them if you're going to understand where anything is going at any time.
I think that's such a cool point, because for DMs, generally the problem of railroading sort of comes about because we want to actually feel like we know what we're doing rather than just reacting to the players and it not exactly being as epic as we want all the time. So I think, to your point, knowing your players and examining, okay, they're not taking these quests and instead they're doing these other things, so let's change what I'm actually giving them and see if they start reacting that way. And if they continue just trying to do other stuff, then that sort of tells you that they're in it to be that creative or to be, that chaotic in certain cases. But if they do start reacting, you're like, oh, okay, so I was just giving them the wrong hooks, or the wrong things, and they were actually looking for a different story. So I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, it does speak to another aspect, which is players hate railroading unless they're the ones who kind of set the parameters for that railroading. And that's what creating a backstory is. Like when you have that session 0, when you have your players prepare a more in-depth backstory, they're giving free rein to be like, hey, when it comes to these things, so long as they're playing their character, they are more interested in going towards these kinds of objectives. So if it's like a dethroned prince type character, and you're like, oh my goodness, I want this this player to do this thing because I think it'd be really cool for them, mention something from the kingdom that prince came from, right? It's like, oh, that castle we were talking about, I heard that there was actually someone from the kingdom of such and such there. And then it becomes a thing where, they can ignore it, they can act like it doesn't matter in the moment because they want to do something else. But if they don't have a different preference, obviously they'll go for it.
Absolutely. I think we've talked about good railroading a lot, but let's talk about bad railroading, right? What are some examples, and specifically, how do you spot maybe warning signs of bad railroading, Tanner?
Yeah, and we will reach out for you guys in a bit, but I think for me, it's when the DM stops collaborating with the players. Because especially when it comes to challenge resolution or role-playing, a lot of that, the most fun moments are when the players are bringing a lot of solutions and creativity, and the DM's like, okay, this is different from what I thought, but let's roll with it. And that's very different from like the most negative kind of railroading in my mind, where the DM's like, no, and they're just waiting until you say the thing that they want you to say. They're just waiting, like it doesn't matter how good you roll, they'll be like, it's not realistic for what I set this up. I think that's a very harsh part, because I think the best parts of utilizing railroading is being like, I'll take what the players are giving me, I'll make it work, I'll pivot it until it goes where I want, and then still make it so that their choices play a role in what I had planned, right? But that's different than saying, the players want to do this thing. No, I'm not even going to try and work it in, like shift how my plans were. I'm just going to, bulldoze straight ahead. Yeah,
I think the key word is collaboration there. I have two examples from a campaign that I just finished up. Basically, the bad example was the party was at a casino planet in the Astral Sea. Don't ask, my Astral Sea was very different than kind of rules as written. But I wanted to get them to a different planet where they would be slaves. So I basically created I created a cutscene where each of them were doing something individually, and then they just all got taken down by these like ninjas, and then they were slaves, right? And that was bad because I didn't sort of explain, hey guys, I want to like jump time here a little bit. I want to move to different stakes. On the flip side, with that same campaign towards the end, I was getting burnt out. And so I was like, hey guys, I'm getting burnt out. I want to skip time and just kind of artificially move forward. These are certain circumstances that we're going to be facing now. And they were totally fine with that, right? And obviously that cut away some of their choice. But when we worked together, I think it made for a better storytelling experience. We did have quite a few hands.
And the initial question is, what are examples of bad railroading?
Yes.
Okay, let's start here, work our way back.
Yeah.
Okay. Just like my second session, the world morphing in a way to actively oppose anything they actively wanted to do. And so, it's like, you want to go here? Well, guess what? It just so happens to be closed here today on the second day of the year. Okay, well, you want to go here? Well, guess what? There's construction. Sorry. Oh, you want to go down to the sewer? Well, guess what? The sewer is extremely toxic, and if you try to step in there, you will die instantly. Like stuff like that. So you want to if you want to sort of push them in a certain direction and try to rein them in, you got to be a little bit more subtle about it, So that's kind of how I see it, right?
That makes me think of that scene in the Truman Show when he's trying to drive and all the cars are in his way, or they open up. And I think that analogy is probably a really good one for railroading, right? Because he's still in the bubble, right, the whole time. I don't know if it's called a bubble, but the second where he's trying to do something and everything seems weirdly in his way, I think that's probably when you've crossed into the bad.
Yeah. Okay, there was another question here. Yes.
Yes.
In the yellow.
Yeah. Something my last DM did is they presented us with the illusion of choice. It wasn't like they were like, here's a golden road, you can take the that you can take the forest or the beach, and they both end up at the castle. They were like, here's a fork in the road, and then there actually wasn't. It was just one path, no matter what. my whole party really hated that, and I ended up taking over that group. So.
Oh gosh. Well, they learned not to railroad. Wonderful. Okay.
Actually, can I speak to that a little bit?
Yeah.
I think that's a fascinating example. And I'm going to be bold, I think, and make some assumptions, but I'm guessing the frustration happened because the players felt like nothing they did actually mattered in that choice. They felt like it was a pointless choice. I think it's interesting because the illusion of choice is still going to show up when you DM. So here's an example. You're DMing for a group and you tell them, you enter a room, you see a table, you see a nightstand with a cup on it, you see a sitting chair and a bookcase, right? What do you do? And the party obviously says, I would like to investigate the room or this, that, or the other thing, right? In this sense, you've sort of given them an illusion of choice. And I guess maybe illusion of choice is the wrong word, but it's more of you've constrained their choices, right? They can't choose to fight the orc because there's no orc. You've technically railroaded them to doing a certain thing. So I think as a DM, we need to understand that whatever we do, we are making choices for them and what they can react to. But I think, like you pointed out, the difference is when the choices we're giving them, they feel like don't matter. And they feel like, I didn't need to make that, right? That was pointless to the story. But that was a very good point.
Yeah, and going along with that, I think we as DMs care so much about where players end up, forgetting that much like life, how you get there is actually more interesting. So if the players don't care about the big bad, in a way that's wonderful. Because you're like, okay, it could be a simple, they go there, they fight it. But it's a little bit more interesting if you're like, okay, let's follow where they go. You know, I'll place little signposts along the way to kind of hopefully guide them that way. But then when they eventually do end up at the big bad, that's a much better story.
Absolutely, absolutely. We had a few more hands here in the front.
Okay, so I appreciate the term cutscene, because I think that's a huge sign. If in a video game it would be a cutscene where the player gets glued in place and something happens. The emperor gets killed, you know, the person you try to kill has gobbled on, you can see the local crown show up, or anything like that where you, as you said, where you care where they end up. And not only that, but enforcing how they get there, you're going to drive your players batty doing that every single time. They're going to see it, and they're going to hate it. Every time you try to say, you're arrested, they're going to go nuts and say, no, I cast fireball on myself. Like, it's never going to work. If you want to play D&D, you can have a plot. You can say, here's a guy who's tormenting you. But if you're going to deal with that and how you deal with that, that is up to you. Is a castle? You don't have to fight in the castle. That'd be a great place. I've got a lot of details because I've bought an adventure for that. But you don't have to, because if you're going to enforce that, and if they try to planar gate that dude out of that castle, you just say no. You can't care that much. You can't set it that much in stone. You've got to have flexibility, or you're going to do that, and your player's going to hate it.
It's a good reminder, don't be too precious with what you come up with, right? Or in writing, you know, kill your darlings.
Yeah.
Where you, like, it's great to come up with things, and it's okay to have favorites. And even if that favorite plot point that you had planned doesn't get used, to recycle it, but don't hold to it so tightly that the creativity in D&D just dies, right?
Yeah, honestly, what you said kind of made me think of my 2-year-old, which if any of you have had 2-year-olds, wow. But he wants to get into everything, anything, especially things that can kill him or that cost a lot of money, or just, you know. And lately I've started realizing that I stop him maybe too soon, right? Like, don't do that, or don't pull mommy's tomato plants out of the ground, or whatever, right? And I've started kind of pulling back and realizing if I just let him and I like watch him, he's not going to get into as much trouble as I think. And I think with players, sometimes we need to do that, right? They're going to, you know, plane shift the big bad to another place or banish him, and there's no other baddies, right? So give it a minute and they're gone. If that happens, let it happen. Let the players win, right? Have those brief moments where they get one over on the DM and let them enjoy that and smile inwardly, and then plan for revenge or whatever and move on, right? But I think that's a very good point of just like holding back and just relaxing a lot more as a DM, even though we all got into this because we're control freaks. Another word on cutscenes. I think cutscenes can work when it's what they're perceiving, right? You stand in awe as the Death Star blows up, right? That's a pretty sweet cutscene and allows them to feel something and do something. But like you said, when you're like, you can't cast Fireball, they're like, but I can. I have it in my sheet. It's like right there. That's where the issue is. We'll get to you in a sec. I think there were other hands who haven't spoken yet. Yes, in the back with the glasses.
I just wanted to bring up that I have had a DM use the rules as the rails in a way that was really bad. And I'm not talking like rule of cool's great, love that. But if a DM is applying the rules differently to their NPCs in their world than they do to the player characters, that can cause problems. For example, in this case, the DM ignored the number of spell slots the monsters had in order to drive the plot forward. And so, I mean, an extra spell slot or two, that's forgivable, but when playing a spellcaster, you can't cast a single spell for a 4-hour combat because you've got to counterspell 12 times by one creature in one combat. You just got to make sure you're applying the rules the same to both sides of the scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's obvious that they had a specific agenda.
Yeah.
And it was so visible. And that's, I mean, in a way, as DMs, as much as we talk about like, oh, be careful about railroading, you're going to do it. And if you do it smartly. Do it in a hidden way. And I think that that's a great example of like, you can be too obvious about it. And you don't have to use one method to get what you want. Obviously, in that case, they were like, oh, the tool I have is counterspell. And when the only tool in your belt is counterspell, everything looks like a spell. And that's, you just keep going at it. I think you got to just be creative. Yeah. Honestly.
I think also as players, so this is me taking off the DM hat, putting on a player hat, sometimes we need to give our DMs grace and let ourselves be railroaded. My guess is in that case, the DM probably didn't know how to make the encounter interesting or difficult enough without just pressing the counterspell button over and over again. So my guess is that was probably a DM skill issue rather than him wanting to railroad. I think sometimes as players, you got to have conversations and say like, hey, I didn't really like what you did there, but I want to support you. I want you to have fun. And I think that conversation also needs to be had. So moving on, what are some tools or techniques that we can use to avoid bad railroading or prevent it?
One way, I like to think of my campaign as segments rather than as one whole, because if they're segments, you can take a piece out and just slot it back into one little, the same path, and then you can put that same segment that you weren't able to use later on. I think just thinking of your campaign as a little bit flexible, I think that's great, because if we're thinking about a railroad, like think about one of those toy little railroads that goes around the Christmas tree type thing, right? As much as it's fun seeing it go in the same place, imagine how much more fun it would be if there was just a little train track switch where it's like, oh, you can go on a little side quest and then we can get back on it, and that's okay. I think that that's a big part of it. Let's say that a player, you're like, oh, I just want them to go shopping, get it over with, go on to the next thing, but then suddenly shopping becomes a whole thing where they are, really searching for a specific piece of loot, or they're really searching, or they're causing a lot of issues for the merchants. Whatever it is, be like, okay, this is what it is. Let's, I'll stop thinking about what's next. Let's think about how to make this super fun and go from there. I also think that a good break helps a lot with railroading. If you feel like you're in a situation where you're like, man, I keep using this counter spell because they're not doing what I want, then maybe that's like, okay, we have a big, like I do one of my major spells for this enemy, and then we have a little pause and I do a little cliffhanger, be like, we'll be back in 10 minutes, everyone take a break. At which point you could be like, okay, My mind was stuck on one solution. I wasn't being flexible with my player. What can I do? And at that point, you're giving yourself just some space to breathe, and that's where creativity thrives.
Space to breathe is so important. Honestly, I think for me, when I fall into the bad railroading trap the most is when my players catch me off guard, but I'm sort of emotionally compromised, right? Like I'm involved in the encounter, and then my players say or do something that I'm not expecting, and I'm like, oh. I think if you just pause, breathe and adopt your like maniacal dungeon master pose and just wait for them for a second, that helps me a ton. I also have a rule, going back to what you were saying, never tell a player character what they think or what they feel inside, in terms of you think this or you feel afraid, or I actually struggled with that for a very long time, right? I found myself saying you feel afraid of the big bad or whatever, and on one hand that's super lazy DMing because you're telling and not showing, which we all know is very bad, right? You should show and not tell. But on the other hand, it was taking away the very essence of why people play D&D, to think and feel like someone else, right? And if you're telling them what to do, that's a bad thing. So if you can avoid that, I think you'll avoid a lot of bad railroading. Yes.
I think a really important thing is there's this baked in logic that a lot of people really misconstrue about D&D and just TTRPGs in general, where it's the GM versus the players. That's never how it works, and that's never how it should work, because at the end of the day, that will just lead to awful, awful communication, which is a backbone, and also will lead to people being hating each other. And then why would you want to play? It's about, you all want the same thing, really, at the end of the day. It's to have fun, it's to make an interesting story, it's a whole group. The GM is just the setting, and you can't really be angry at the setting, They are trying to make a home and an interesting world for you. They're not trying to beat you up, because really, it's not a fun story if it's just, haha, I shot you and you're dead. You need those players, and those players need you,
Yeah, to that point, I think that collaboration with players on a deeper level is only possible if you think of them as allies. Especially, speaking about, we had a panel on chaos the other day, and I think chaos and railroading kind of feel like the opposites, where it's like, oh, I railroad, so it's not chaos.
Like reaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's say the player throws something at you, or they go off the beaten path, and you're like, I don't know what to do. At that point, loop them in. Be like, okay, I'm thinking on my feet. So you wanted to go into this random building. I have no idea what's in there. What do you think's in there? Or you're like, you go in there and you see three people. Jim, what's one of those people? Mark, what about you? And you kind of use them. If you're ever in a pickle, that's a great way to be like, you know what? I'm not gonna do a hardball here. I'm just going to make this a fun little branch off of the path, and I'm going to use them as collaboration, and that can be really fun. Like if you've ever had a player voice an NPC, hilarious. Like when they play that, because suddenly they're like, "Is it okay if I say this?" And you're like, "Go ahead." Or if they're trying to give something away, you're like, "Okay, you're allowed." It's a fun moment, and it shows that you're really allying with the players.
I think using people who aren't involved in the chaotic actions is even better in those instances. So if someone is doing something that is unexpected and they've sort of run away from the party, have the other players fill out the details of what that person faces, because it can make for a lot of really fun experiences. A great example of what you're talking about, though, is actually from an episode of Bluey, which is, I get it, but it's a funny episode where it shows one of Bluey's friends plays a game with Bluey and her dad, and it's really fun. She tries to teach that game to her dad, but he doesn't quite get it. And that there's sort of this moment of confusion and conflict where he's trying to play the game one way, she's trying to play the game one way, and they can't dial in the difficulty level that matches both of what they want until they then have this kind of come to Jesus moment, or I guess come to each other moment, where, this is what I want. Oh, this is what I want. Oh, and then they're able to adjust the difficulty to what they need. So I think, the basis behind that, the kind of fundamental, is having really good player DM dynamics, right? And that has to exist before you start playing, which is sometimes difficult if you're starting up with a new group, which is why session 0 is so important. And as a DM, you need to sort of have the presence of mind to ask the important questions, have those hard discussions, but create an environment where your players feel like they can talk to you at any moment of like, hey, I didn't really have fun last session. And then you can be like, oh, really? Why? Rather than taking it personally or getting defensive, allowing for that dialogue is so very important.
Yeah. So I saw a billion hands a second ago. Start here.
I like to just kind of control the pace of play. Like, especially if I'm a player, I kind of like to treat it like my DM spent time and effort and they cooked me this cool meal. I can put salt and pepper on it. I can choose to not interact with bits of it, but what's on my plate is what I get to interact with at the beginning. And then kind of as you get to the end and you're starting to make and lead the DM into what are they going to prepare for next week, that's where more of my player agency gets to come in and say, hey, this is something I'd like to see. This is something you can prepare. That way you don't feel like you have left work on the table, but I also get to feel like my choices matter.
Yeah, wonderful. I love the salt pepper analogy. It's super perfect.
Yes?
I think, especially the DM, going back to what Kirsten, she said actually earlier, is you need to be, if you're not celebrating your players' successes with them, then you're not working together. But that being said, I had a group where, as a DM, when my plan actually came to fruition, they celebrated too. I mean, they're like, yeah, my character, we've all run away in fear. Congratulations. Good job. So it's, the players aren't against the DM, you're all in it together. If you don't have that attitude, that where you're celebrating everyone's success in the game, then you're not going to have fun.
Yeah. Matt Colville on his YouTube channel, MCDM, that's his company. He talks about how sportsmanship is a word that we don't use enough in this hobby, and I think he's absolutely right. In the striped shirt.
What do you do when you have players that kind of like to railroad the DM in certain situations? Like I have players that with persuasion want to be able to get away with whatever they want, or they meet like a town leader and the town leader gives them the quest and their persuasion check is like, okay, why don't you just come with me then? Like why don't you come with me to, kill the dragon? And you're like, you give them extra resources because as the town leader you can do that. But they're not happy with that because they want the leader to go with them. Like what do you do in those kind of situations?
First of all, I love this question because one, I've run into it so often. I don't know if I have the perfect answer, but I think it goes back to the idea of like that my players rolled really well, right? The check, they succeeded, and they know it, like they 18, 20, whatever it is. So if you say no, it feels like railroading. It feels like they lost. I think in those cases, you have a few options because obviously their morale is tied to what happens next. I think one thing you can do is you can have the person go with them. And I think if you do that, right, like what they want happens, I think if you do that, you have two sub options and one of them can be kind of dangerous, right? And I think this is the one that I often go to most, where what they want actually happens, but it's not as good as they want it. And I think the only ways to do that the right way is to make it ridiculous or unexpected, right? So like the person goes with them, but he smells really bad, and because of that they have disadvantage on certain checks. He can still help, but in this kind of fun, quirky way, it's like, wait, why did we want him with us? And then the other option is you go with them and they have that kind of victory and it's nice and it's helpful, and then you just sort of make things more difficult on the back end, I think is the other option. But go ahead.
No, yeah, I think there's a lot of creative ways to do it. First, though, if you look at a player's role, like they're an overwhelming success that you weren't planning on, and your initial reaction is like, oh no, I think that's worth investigating because it happens all the time, right? Where you're like, oh no, they got their way. Why is that a bad thing? Like, question that initially. If the concern is, oh, the NPC that they want to go with them is overpowered, there are ways to resolve that, right? If the concern is instead like, oh, I don't want to juggle another NPC in their party, I think both of them have an easy solution where they stick around for a second and then they die gruesomely. But there's other solutions as well, right? I think that's an important part to remember is like, if you have a negative reaction, investigate why, and then based on the specific issue you're concerned about, add a storytelling reason for how that gets resolved, right?
I also think another option is that you can give them better than what they wanted, right? So they're like, hey, leader, come with us and help it. And he's like, you know what? I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to send my bodyguard, who's way better at fighting than I am. And then, maybe the bodyguard develops some sort of other plot line that you're not intending, right? Like bounty hunters come looking for him and now the party's stuck with him and they're, all sorts of things. But you got to be careful when that happens, I think, because obviously their emotions are compromised, and if you do the wrong thing, they're gonna be like, oh, that was a letdown. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about railroading when it comes to like specific story elements and getting someone to a specific location or doing a certain thing, which is a lot of railroading. The main problems I've had with railroading are actually around combat. Being forced into combat when you don't want to, when the characters won't choose that. And it gets very, very frustrating because, we might enter this room who's a lackey of the PPEG, right? Who doesn't know we're coming. We didn't know they were coming, and they're, working at a desk, right? We can come in and we can start trying to talk to the guy, start trying to convince to our side, and the DM's just like, no, he's just going to fight you. Like, no, guards are just going to show up. This is kind of why I've been banned by multiple DMs, because I don't like constant combat. I will cast Minor Illusion and Mage Hand to get myself out of combat. We're attacked by goblins who want to steal our food. Okay, Minor Illusion in the barrel, make it look like fish, try and trade it so we can leave. They're all like, no, they're going to attack you. And I've had that happen to me over and over and over, and it just gets frustrating when every single night, you're trying to make it through the woods, every single night there's going to be a combat or two. It's dumb. It's like, no, my character's going to enter, and we're going to try and convince him to our side. He's restrained, why is combat the only option here, right? And I've found a couple really good DMs that handle this, but like, there's an owl bear that wants to attack us. Can we knock it out and befriend it? No, it's just going to eat you. Like,
yeah.
I've noticed that a lot when it comes to railroading into the campaigns I've played. Most of it has been focused on combat, actually, just putting us in situations where now we're all fighting and there's no way out of it or around it ever.
Right.
So kind of, how do you balance story with combat in that kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it speaks to an issue that isn't just railroad specific. It's an issue of balance within the game, because there's a lot of people like different things. Some people love role playing, less about combat. Some people love exploration and finding secrets and exploring new rooms, dungeons, right? And they like just a little bit of combat with that, but they don't want it to turn into slog. As a DM, it is our job to balance that. And it's very important before we start the campaign to have that discussion up front, to be like, okay, what kind of campaign are you into? But I think also it's a DM maturity thing, because for a lot of new DMs, everything's combat related, right? Everything is just an excuse to get to combat, because we have these fancy character sheets, and why not use them, Yeah. But the problem is that's only one aspect of D&D. So I think that if you find yourself constantly doing combat, and most importantly, if you find that you have players who aren't happy with that, then you need to realize that, okay, I'm inflexible. I need to allow for other solutions. Yeah.
I was also going to add, honestly, I think we should stop using the word combat. Like, we should say encounter, because really what it is the encounter is an obstacle in our progression towards our goal. That's all, right? And sometimes encounters can involve combat, but it's not like we shouldn't plan a combat. We should plan an encounter where there's a problem that the group needs to solve or overcome, and that problem could be there are guards in the way, stopping them from getting where they want to go. However they want to solve that, that should be up to the players, right? And if they want to devolve into combat, or evolve, depending on how you view it, right? They can choose. But I think, like Tanner said, it's definitely a skills deficit or experience deficit. And to that note, I think to fix railroading, learn all the mechanics you can from all sorts of different, systems, and learn how to apply them in a pinch. Have a bunch of like resources that you can pull from. I think that helps.
Yeah. Real quick, another thing: if you go into initiative for things that aren't just strictly combat more often, it can train you out of making everything a you beat them or they beat you. Because if you go into initiative to get through that door before someone else, suddenly you're using alternate end goals.
Yeah,
right?
but you can still use mechanics
Yes.
to do that, right? You can still use your cool abilities, and it's still fun.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's it on time. I'm sorry we weren't able to get all your comments. We really appreciate you guys, being here and talking with us. We have another panel later today at 7 on improv, which is going to be fun. And if you want to know more about us, go to betterdungeonmaster.com. Thank you guys so much. You've been an excellent audience. And
Yes,
take care.
thank you.
Yeah.